Hi, I'm Megan Skidmore, and this is the Beyond the Shadow of Doubt. I'm a woman, daughter, sister, spouse, mother, life coach, and person of faith on a mission to normalize asking questions and allowing doubts, not only in a faith journey, but in all aspects of life. Join me in bringing this traditionally taboo topic out of the shadows of shame and into the light. I'm a firm believer that we normalize through more talking and engaging in discussion. More talking peels back, exposes, and erases the layers of shame associated with questions and doubts. When we're more authentic about our journey, we are more powerful because shame has no power in the face of authenticity. I'm currently hosting a podcast giveaway. To enter, simply leave a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and upload a screenshot to my Google Doc. Share this giveaway with a friend, and if your friend's name is drawn, you both win a $100 gift card. The link to enter, including to the Google Doc, is in the show notes or in the bio of my Instagram profile. Welcome to part 2 in my Spiritual Wounds series. In part 1, episode number 51, I ended the episode with the question, why is it important to talk about spiritual wounds? And I answered it using an abstract entitled Spiritual Wounding and Affliction, Facilitating Spiritual Transformation and Social Justice Work, written by Edward Crook, MSW, PhD, Associate Professor, the University of British Columbia School of Social Work and Family Studies. He wrote, spiritual wounding is essentially the violation of the sacred or spiritual core in human beings, harm experienced at the deepest level of one's being. This assumes, first, that a spiritual core exists in human beings, and this core can be damaged by external conditions. And second, that such damage amounts to a spiritual wounding that leads to a spiritual affliction. The state of spiritual affliction transcends all other forms of suffering and induces an inertia such that those experiencing the condition are typically viewed as responsible for their situation, and the social conditions that lead to spiritual harm are largely ignored. So my addressing this topic is me not ignoring spiritual wounds. And in my previous episode, part 1, I invited you to consider what spiritual wounds you have seen or experienced, either personally or collectively within a faith community. A few months ago, I inadvertently determined a spiritual wound that I have experienced personally, and I believe that we have collectively as conservative faith communities. I was listening to the At Last She Said It podcast, episode number 113, where Susan and Cynthia had guest Kathryn Knight Sonntag, who wrote The Mother Tree, Discovering the Love and Wisdom of Our Divine Mother. Kathryn shared further exploration of the mother is part of the unfolding restoration in our hearts. I loved that so much. It is so spot on, and here's why I think that. It reminded me of when I interviewed Brother Tom Christofferson in June in episodes 43 and 44, where at one point he shared, we believe that we are part of a restoration as opposed to a reformation. The language of restoration is not always the same as reformation. Rather than focusing on sin, we focus on learning. Rather than focusing on punishment, we focus on healing, end quote. Such a different and important perspective to remember that we are part of an ongoing restoration, not reformation. And that is what I want to do with you today. Focus on the language of a restoration, including learning and healing, which incidentally are two essential aspects of addressing spiritual wounds. We must be willing to learn in order to identify the wounds that exist and the source therein before we can then commence a healing process. Found in the preface of The Mother Tree, Discovering the Love and Wisdom of Our Divine Mother, and on the podcast, Kathryn shared the following. I believe asking questions and exploring possibilities are indispensable ways to show love and reverence for revealed truth. Just amazing, absolutely beautiful. And then Susan followed up by sharing, I think that's the exact opposite of the way that many LDS approach the whole concept of questions and explorations. It's really common for church members to think that revealed truth is meant to not only answer a question, but to be the end of the questioning. I think it's hugely ironic that we shy away from questions because our church began in a question. And then I think about what happened after, and it must have just been never-ending questions from young Joseph Smith. And so I don't know why we should be afraid of questions, end quote. And I echo that sentiment. I agree 100% with this line of thinking. Questions are not to be feared. Questions are healthy, normal, and part of the human experience of learning and progression. At about 8 minutes into the podcast episode, they talk a little bit more about the mother wound. And Susan shares, Cynthia and I talk about this all the time, the difficulty of women supporting other women, and talking about this gap and the way women are wounded by this in our theology. Kathryn goes on to explain how patriarchy is a source for this deep wounding. She says it can be very difficult for women to go through that process of waking up. It's sort of a process of becoming aware of the realities of the world and the realities of a lot of confusion, a mixing of truth and falsehoods within our own religious system and framing, and the way we even talk about what is doctrine. It's a very difficult thing to unravel, and it's very painful because it does sit at the heart of our own identity. And having to do that work, the unraveling of what is authentically me and what is a construct is scary. End quote. I want to focus on this idea of a construct for a minute. In episodes 40 and 41, I had the honor of chatting with SMU anthropology PhD candidate, Elizabeth Thomas. Highly recommend you listen to those episodes. And in it, she shared this about this idea of social constructs. She says, for an anthropologist, our goal tends to be to go as far from home as possible and to hold up this mirror to say, what does some apparently completely different experience teach me about my own? So when I think about social constructs, I imagine this castle that we build ourselves, that whatever it might be, our understanding of what it means to be a Latter-day Saint or a Christian, our understanding of gender, of sexuality, of patriotism, it can be anything, but we build this building in order to put something in and to keep something out. It's not usually a malicious intent, but it serves a purpose for us. It helps us to make sense of the world around us. It helps us to feel secure in where we are. But what you can see, if you look at your own castle that you have built around whatever topic or issue, that if you look somewhere very different, you don't have to accept it as your worldview. You don't have to step in saying, I'm ready to throw away my castle and go live in someone else's home. But when you look at someone else's, perhaps they don't call it a castle. Perhaps they don't call it anything like you would recognize. And perhaps it doesn't even look like your castle. But you're going to see that they too have built some kind of structure that they keep safe within. And looking at the differences between those two structures can really be enlightening. What we'll see is we are far more common as human beings than we ever would have realized. It also teaches us that there are other ways to live life, that there are other ways that people live happy, successful, resilient lives. And she continues, now in terms of bringing that into a faith context, I found that this mindset might make people a little bit more uncomfortable because perhaps your castle is built on what you see to be undeniable truth with a capital T, and it gets really, really scary and perhaps even uncomfortable on a new level to think that other people are not doing the things that you've been taught you need to do, that you must do to make the divine happy, to make you acceptable to the divine. And there's a lot to break down with that. And she says that in my version of the divine, they are a loving, caring, understanding divine that understands we're working on the best knowledge that we have, and that the basis is love. But we also work with the understanding that we are a child of God. And so the brilliance and resilience that other people are having in other ways of life, that goodness and that light is coming from the same source. And I'm not going to judge my way or my castle of being built the best, because one day it too will fall down. It's simply a different way. And giving people those examples of hope, of a chance to be different, is strengthening to them, end quote. Such a great description of a social construct. I am a proud member of the Dialogue Podcast Network. The Dialogue Podcast Network features shows by Latter-day Saints who wish to bring their faith into dialogue with the larger stream of world religious thought and with human experience as a whole, and to foster artistic and scholarly achievement based on their cultural heritage. For more information, go to dialoguejournal.com/podcasts. Many people view patriarchy as a social construct, as a castle, we could say. Continuing with Kathryn's interview, she said, I think that a part of the issue for women being born within patriarchy, and we hear a lot this idea, it's sort of the water we swim in. We could even, this is me interjecting, it's the castle that we're born into that's already built. And she continues, and so it's very difficult to recognize initially that there is perhaps a heavily misconstrued idea of what a woman should be, what she should contribute to the world, who she is as a divine individual, but also what that means in terms of a family situation within society. And we have to confront that idea that there's been a lack of desire to even understand what is feminine, what is female, and that directly affects our ability to even consider a divinely feminine figure in heaven, end quote. Every civilization does not define the role of woman in the same way. In other words, every people, culture, group, etc., has built a unique castle regarding this topic of patriarchy and the role of women and the role of men and what gender means and sexuality and so on. I know these quotes are long, but I include them because they are so, so important. And here's why I think so. If we cannot directly face these issues surrounding Heavenly Mother and the feminine divine, how will we be able to face and address the gender issues that currently divide us? And the chasm is deep. If we cannot have healthy conversations about gender, how will we ever understand how our LGBTQIA2S plus siblings fit into God's plan, especially those who identify as transgender, non-binary, gender fluid, two-spirit, intersex, and so on? This is one of the big unanswered questions for me right now. These individuals exist. This is not hypothetical. It is fact. If we believe what we purport to believe as persons of faith, that means there is a place in God's plan for each and every human being. Just because percentage-wise they may be fewer does not mean they are worth any less or their contribution any less significant. If anything, it commands more attention because the number is few. The Savior led the way through the parable of the 99 and the 1. Christ actively sought after the one. Sheep do not wander off on their own away from the flock. If a sheep is alone, it is because they were pushed out. This explicitly teaches a prescribed course of action when we see members of our flock who are no longer within proximity of the physical flock. Our role is to go after them, not with the intent to tell them how to exist, but rather invite them to join in all their God-given authenticity. This is what I call the gender wound, and I believe in addressing the mother wound will help us better ask questions and be open-minded, humble, teachable, learn, understand, and grow in our concept of what it means to be divinely masculine, divinely feminine, or any combination of the two. In Kathryn's book on page 13, she shares, "My experiences and study led me to see that we have a mother wound in our theology. This theological phenomena is a collective wound that has affected our ability to perceive the need for the mother as individuals. Just as unexamined pain, be it feelings of unworthiness, abandonment, or anger, can keep us from a clear perspective of what's happening inside and outside of us, our unacknowledged wound caused by separation from our spiritual mother likewise obscures our vision of ourselves and the divine. The ramifications of what it means to be separated from our mother are yet to be fully uncovered and understood." That last statement really stood out to me when I read it. I'm of the opinion that this great divide in our understanding of gender is one of the ramifications. If we cannot acknowledge this mother wound, how will we be able to fully see the divine within ourselves? We all have masculine energy and we all have feminine energy. Some have one more than the other. With a primary focus on a male deity, we are inadvertently ignoring feminine energy. And really, what is feminine versus masculine energy? Go back to the definition of social constructs that I shared with you by Elizabeth Thomas. It is what, over time, generations have categorized words, behaviors, interests, abilities, strengths, talents, and so on to be into either the feminine castle or the masculine castle. This categorization has left little room for anything outside of that. I love plants and gardening. I get excited to introduce a new baby plant into my world. In my front yard, I have several types of bulbs: amaryllis, gladiolus, paperwhites, daylilies, and they come back each year. Inside my home, I have houseplants, including a snake plant, a spider plant, jade, and aloe vera. The aesthetic each have are very different. One might say the bulbs are more feminine and the indoor plants are more masculine. Why? Because somewhere, sometime in history, an idea may have been born that colorful blooms represent feminine energy and variegated green, pointy, sharp plants reflect masculine. That may be true to an extent, depending on the eye of the beholder, I suppose. But are we also noticing that the colorful blooms last only for a few weeks, tops? Whereas the aloe, spider, and snake plants are solid over time with proper care. Even the way they propagate is different. Some bulbs will spread underground, still connected to the original plant, whereas the indoor plants create tiny little baby plants off of the mother plant. Spider or snake-like little plants grow off of the mother plant, but in order to flourish and grow, they must be separated from the main plant and put into their own pot or their own spot of ground. One could argue that to be feminine or masculine, not one over the other. In the human world, a child must separate from both their mother and father to grow and develop on their own as well. Why does it have to be one or the other? Why not some of both? I'm asking this rhetorically, and this is a question that could be applied broadly, not just to plants. Back to the interview, Cynthia says, I see this collectively in our faith tradition, and I'm starting to wake up to how I see it in myself. It's hard to see that erasure of the feminine divine or heavenly mother, or this crescent of what's purely feminine. Kathryn responds, it's hard to see how limited we are in that regard. There needs to be some massive systemic changes before we can feel free collectively. It's overwhelming, but I think it's a beautiful invitation as well to just consider for a moment other possibilities of existing in the world. And I think on a global scale, so many of us are ready for. We have practiced thinking about Christ as embodying certain traits, attributes, and characteristics, and a lot of those are feminine, she shares. And so we usually go so far as to taking those back to Christ, which is appropriate. And Kathryn asks, but where did he get those attributes from? We become more aware of Christ not only pointing us toward the Father, but now I feel deeply, profoundly, his pointing us toward the Mother in this time of deep struggle, end quote. Why am I bringing this up? This was a huge discovery for me, that as an extension of this mother wound is a gender wound. We have shortchanged ourselves and our appreciation for humanity in all its diversity by not allowing, or at least encouraging, deeper discussion and exploration about the divine feminine. This hurts all ways of gender expression. From a young age, children are told ways they should or shouldn't be, or dress, or act, or speak, versus allowing organic development of the human that already exists within each little soul. I'd love to know your thoughts on this topic. Please send me an email to hello@meganskidmorecoaching.com. Share this with a friend and start up the conversation in your local communities. Thanks for being here. Come join me in Hopeful Spaces, a Dallas Hope Charities component of Hopeful Discussions, which is sponsored by Mercedes-Benz Financial Services USA. Hopeful Spaces is a monthly parent, caregiver, and ally support group facilitated by Megan Skidmore Coaching. To join is free. Simply send an email to chc@dallashopecharities.org. Visit meganskidmorecoaching.com, where you can find this podcast, as well as additional free resources. Check the podcast show notes on any platform for links to sources cited. Follow me on Facebook or Instagram for more and to send me a DM. To help the podcast grow, please follow, rate, and review, as well as share it with a friend.